I've often said this. I said, if you gave me two sets of twins, 20 twins over here and 20 twins over here, and you gave me, say, a month to train one group in just spear or staff and train the other group in two-handed longsword. At the end of that 30 days, that group with the staff is going to beat them 9 out of 10 times. It's the nature of that weapon and the way it works in a group. But if you let me give these guys swords and shields, then at the end of 30 days, it's going to be about 50-50. And I've done this experiment with just regular students over the decades, using about 7 or 8 over here and 7 or 8 over here. And I've seen that that's the results. The pole arms just go right through them. You can put the pole arm into the hands of a complete beginner.
Yes.
Oh my God! I did this seminar once at this camp, this youth camp, and I had a whole truckload of pole arms. So we had like 14 of these young teenagers with spears. And the rest of us, about 7 of us, we had swords and shields and two-handed swords, and we thought we're going to tear them apart. They obliterated us. They were laughing the whole time as they were like 4 and 5 of them hitting us on the ground, and it was insane. You can't fight that without missile weapons. You need bows and crossbows and cavalry to fight that. You need to have your own pole weapons to fight that. And we've done the experiments where if you have pole arms on each side, and you throw a couple people in there with shorter swords and bucklers and shields, that makes all the difference. Yeah. So I've seen, there are reenactment groups that will do pike battles, but I don't think they're very much use because of a number of factors. Their weapons are wobbly. When someone is hit, he throws his hands up and leaves the battlefield instead of falling down on the ground there, where now you're having to walk over dead bodies covered with blood and guts and mud. That makes a difference. Yes. There's no missile weapons coming in. There's no threat of a cavalry attack. That makes all the difference. So if you keep it to a small skirmish where people are able to run around and maneuver, as opposed to, we got 3,000 people on the field, but they're fighting really stupidly, then you're really not learning anything, and it doesn't serve.
Very good, thank you. It was very insightful. Could you also tell us, do you also teach fighting in armor?
I don't teach it, but I would demonstrate it. And the reason I don't teach it is because you have to have students who have armor.
Few can afford it, I understand. Few, the same problem here.
So, it's not just that. When I first got on harness and was sparring in it, we immediately saw that all of the techniques of striking blows didn't do anything. The cuts didn't do anything. You're hitting and it's going bing and it's skipping off. You're hitting here and he's going, oh, that was uncomfortable, but that's not going to cut through the armor. Okay, so the techniques we started to do were the anti-armor techniques, the half-sorting techniques, which specifically target the gaps and the joints and the spots that you would want to get. And within about 40 seconds, we were both on the ground going, ow, ow, oh, ow, ow. What were we thinking? We're literally hitting each other into unarmored spots with our blunt swords. We were doing something that we wouldn't do unarmored. I mean, when we're unarmored, if you're going to thrust, you have to have a lot of control and you have to limit your targets so you don't really injure somebody because the thrusts are so dangerous. Yet because we had this safe armor on, we were going at it harder. And we were half sorting and we were getting in there and hitting and we were injuring and bruising each other and we ripped our gambesons and we thought, holy crap. And it's like, duh, these are the techniques that really work on armor. These are the things that they practiced against armor. These are the techniques the sources show us you use against armor. But these are the very techniques you can't use in armored sparring because they're dangerous, because they injure. So you got guys that are going, we're going to do armored combat, but we're going to do it tournament style, meaning no thrusting, which they did do. And it's like, understandable. But if you're not then going over here and saying, okay, we're in our armor and we're going to practice these killing techniques where this blow goes here or goes here or goes here, but I'm not going to do it. I'm going to do it the way we do unarmored when we practice those techniques. Well, that's what you need to do and should do. But then it's like, well, then why did I put on all this armor if when we spar, we're just trading blows and we're not, and then we go and we do some practice, which is exhausting. And then there's also the climate issue. Georgia here gets very, very humid and very hot. So there's only about 4 months out of the entire year that you can get your armor on. And of those 4 months, at least one of them, it's so cold that in your armor, you're shivering from your armor. So we have to have summer gambesons and winter gambesons. And so I always say, you have to experience armor. You have to explore it. And not just plate, but mail and plate and half plate and brigandine. And I've been fortunate that I have kits and partial kits of all that. And so I have done some of it. But it's not my main focus, because if you look at the sources, their primary thing they're teaching is unarmored fighting. And they say that's your foundation. And then into the 16th century, they're dropping the armor. So the majority of our material is not concerned with armor. But there is a source from 1550 that shows the highest form of European armor, where they're in the full, absolute full harness, and it's super tight, very, very lean. It looks like Iron Man, and they even have spikes on it, and it's absolutely stunningly gorgeous, and it's impenetrable. And you look at that and you say, no wonder they started shooting at them, because the only way you're getting through that is by going bang. And the relationship between firearms and this craft is not very well appreciated, because even in the 1300s and 1400s, if somebody brings out a crude firearm and they're firing it at you, however it is, everybody when they go boom and that shrapnel flies and that flame flies, everybody who's not in plate armor goes, ah! And the people in plate armor just go, I'm good, and they keep going. And that's not appreciated or understood. It's just the assumption that the plate armor is only there to engage another knight, or it's only there to resist bows and crossbows, and it's not. It's also there to resist the firearms. So that's a factor. And it's the firearms encourage improvement in armor. You've heard the term bulletproof, right?
Yes. You
know where it comes from?
No.
They would put a piece of armor up, and the armor would shoot at it. And if the round that they fired, the round ball, it would dent the armor. And he'd go up and he'd leave that dent in the armor. And he'd put his armorer mark. This is what was explained to me. He would put his armorer's mark on that, and he would leave that dent in the armor as proof that it resisted the bullet. So now he can sell that bulletproof armor.
Fascinating.
Like, wow, interesting. But eventually, the firearms get so powerful that even if you have just that chest plate, it slows you down enough that they'll shoot you someplace else.
John, have you seen, when I was in Paris, I'm sure you've seen that possible when you were in Paris. Have you seen that armor? I think it was Napoleonic, from Napoleon time, where they shot a cannon at it, and then there is a hole in it, it is shot by a cannon, and then it's unbelievable, right? When you look at it. Yeah.
There's a story from the wars in the Low Countries from, I think, the 1630s, in which this guy said, he writes, I got teased by my men in my company for wearing my rapier Spanish style. And what he means is that he was wearing his rapier like this, where it's very suggestive. Okay.
Okay.
He's going around wearing it like this, and by having the blade over here, as he walks around, he's bumping into people with it, and that can start a duel. Because if I go walking around the street swaggering like this, you don't want to bump into my blade, because then I'll go, hey, asshole, you clumsy, and I'll start a fight, right? So he keeps it like that. And he's fighting in the Low Countries in a trench. And he decides to go up on the top of the trench and insult I don't know if it was the English or the Spanish, insult them. I believe he was Dutch. And as he goes up there, a cannonball hits his hilt and shatters the hilt. And he's knocked backwards into the trench. And he says, if I hadn't worn my hilt that way, I would not have any heirs to this day. He would have gotten his jump blown off. And he says, so anybody who criticizes me, he goes, yeah, I got a story for you. My jeweled hilt protected my family jewels. And I thought, that's so funny. And it also explained the whole, so that's what they mean by wearing it Spanish style. Okay. And there's lots of little anecdotes that are in the literature that are associated with the Renaissance. It's material that's outside of the fight books, but it talks about war and dueling and other aspects, such that I have to study a really broad spectrum of material. Like you said to me, so I study Renaissance, but don't I study some medieval? Yeah, I got to study everything I can about Greco-Roman stuff, medieval stuff, and Baroque and 19th century to find out, where did this Renaissance material go? Why was it lost? Why are we having to recover it? Who forgot it? Why did they forget it? Mm-hmm. You have to study that. That's a lot of material.
Yes, John, another question I have, could you talk about sources? Please correct me, because I'm not very well versed in European sources. Is it correct to say most sources are mostly from Italy or Germany, German and Italian sources? Or I cannot say that?
Yes.
Oh, I can. Okay. Why is it this way, John?
That's a great question. And it's one that I and a lot of other people have pondered. One explanation is that the Renaissance begins in Italy. Okay. So they're writing more scientifically about it, and their culture just promoted that in the different city-states. Another explanation is that the Germanic states went to Italy for scholarship, and so that encouraged that writing. Another possibility is, if you look at France, the 100 Years' War might have destroyed a lot of material. Every time you burn down an estate or a keep or a castle or a library or a monastery, who knows what you're losing? Yeah. Maybe they're so busy fighting, they don't have a time to sit down and write books about it. Yeah. I will say this, in, I believe it's 1526, the Roger of Ascham, I think it is, the future tutor to Queen Elizabeth, says, quote, "Not only is there a master of defense in every township and hamlet in England, but that also that they have written upon it." So he's saying everybody writes a book on fighting. Where are all these books? Because Henry VIII actually made it that any book that was printed in England, a copy had to be sent to the crown and stored. And I've gone through the database of over 33,000 books, and not one of them has anything to do with fencing or fighting. And I found titles like The Serving Man's Defense. Ooh, what's that? And it's a book about prayer. Or I'll find a book called The Art of the Necessity of Defense, in arms. And I'm like, ooh, and it turns out to be by arms, they mean arming you with the gospel. And it's like, what a disappointment. So I think they were writing about it. I think Master Fior says, none of my students had books on martial arts before, but that you can't be a great student without books. Joachim Meyer, 1570, says, you cannot learn martial arts completely from books, but you cannot learn it well enough without them. Wow. That's a completely different philosophy than you see in the Asian martial arts, where they're going, books, we don't need no stinking books. And then they have a couple of books and they revere these books. It's like, really? You're revering the few books you have, and you're telling us who have over 120 technical books with full illustrations stretching hundreds of pages. You're telling us you can't learn anything from them. The books that you guys haven't studied. So you're like, it's like saying you can't learn medicine from a book, or you can't learn math from a book, or you can't learn cooking from a book. Yeah, right. So, there's a phrase called arma et literae, arms and letters, so arms and letters, it goes together. Let me ask you a question. Do you know the origin of the term martial art?
No.
Well, it's a common term, right? It's an English term, isn't it? Martial art, but it comes from a French, and it comes from the Latin, from the French. It goes to the French from the Latin, ars martialis, the arts of Mars, the Roman god of war. So they're referring to the arts of Mars in ancient Roman literature. There's I'm going to mess up the quote, but I think it's either Scipio the Elder or Cicero who says, quote, better that an old man be criticized for not having learned the martial art well enough than a young man be criticized for never having learned it at all. Ooh, I love that. And something that's relevant for you and I, Joseph Swetnam says in 1618, 1617, he says, never stop studying and never stop learning, no matter how old you get and no matter how,